Hi guys. I see you guys are hopped on pretty quick. This was so impromptu. But I am glad that you guys are joining me. Um, a lot of times when I come on and I'm discussing various topics, especially when I talk about relationships, I often mention this particular study, the Adverse Childhood Experiences Study. And this is the study that essentially correlates health outcomes with your experiences as a child. So the experiences that you've had as a child have a direct impact on your mental health and your physical health as an adult. Direct correlation, by the way. So we're going to discuss a lot about that. Also, some stuff was on the TL today. People wanted to talk about. Like I saw a girl trying to correlate astrology with Black women excelling and Black men not, and therefore Black women should be looking outside of Black men for companionship and connection and relationships. So I thought that was pretty interesting. Someone hit me up about talking about that. A couple other things, also probably get into this later as well. This conversation around like these generalizations about Black women as a counter to the generalizations of Black men. And it's making some of y'all look real stupid. So y'all saying doofy shit. I've seen so much doofy shit. I haven't gotten into an argument with someone. I don't know if they watched the show, if they're a fan of the show. I ended up having to block them on Twitter because they were just so dumb. It was irritating the fuck out of me. So I had to let that shit go. But I am interested in finding out what you guys already think and what you guys already believe about childhood trauma. I see so many different conversations happen on the Twitter timeline that show me a lot of us are not clear on what childhood trauma is and its impact. For one thing, people keep saying, well, I already healed from my childhood trauma. I'm not going to say you didn't. But anyone who's been in the process of healing knows that healing never stops. It's a continuous journey that keeps going on and on. Because the more you uncover and the more you heal from, the more you discover things you need to heal from. So I have a whole presentation I want to do for you guys. Hopefully people are going to get the chance to join in and catch up. I won't be going so fast. I won't be going too fast, at least. I do want to make sure that you guys are able to keep up with the conversation. If I don't get a lot of feedback from the chat room, I'm just going to assume you guys get it. So please ask questions. Please have comments. Share your own stories in the chat if you want, whatever you want to do. But the engagement helps me a lot. Help me understand where I need to maybe back up. Maybe I need to answer some questions. Maybe I need to, I want to make sure things land and that you guys are understanding it. So without further ado, hope you all are well. I have this presentation I put together for you guys. It's like a shortened, condensed version of what I teach. So I teach about trauma and resilience. That's what I also do in addition to my other work. And I have usually about 8 to 16 hours of content. We're not going to be here 8 to 16 hours, so I'm not going to do that. But I will do a brief, quick overview of trauma, as well as an understanding of what your childhood trauma does to your body and your brain. Goldlink says a lot of people were raised in toxic situations, so they don't even know that they've been traumatized. They think it's normal. Absolutely. So one of the things that you'll find is that people have normalized things that aren't healthy to the point where we think it's like, not only do we think it's normal, we think it's who we are as Black people. So I'm pretty sure I've used this example a lot. How many times have we had, we've seen these jokes about our moms. Oh, Black moms, they get mad when you leave your, fork in the sink and they flip out. Ha ha ha, our Black moms throw the shoe at you for talking crazy or talking back. Like a lot of these things are hyper reactive and we think that's just normal. It's not normal for your mother who's supposed to love and nurture you to beat you. That's not normal. It's not healthy. We've normalized it because that's what we believe. For whatever reason, that's what we believe is the way to keep our children safe. And it's not. we're actually having adverse responses. So with that, I want to show you guys something I've been working on. Hopefully I can get this to act right. So let's talk about what trauma is and what that means. So question, what makes an experience traumatic? Well, for one thing, it involves a threat, real or perceived, to one's physical or emotional well-being. Now, I can't stress that enough. Your physical well-being might not actually be under threat, but if you feel like or perceive that you're under threat, it's the same response. You have literally the exact same bodily, neurological, emotional response, whether it's real or not, is how you perceive it. Also, it is overwhelming, meaning it takes over. It's something that, you can't seem to get out of. You've been through a depression, it feels like you're in that dark, deep hole, and it's just overwhelming you. It's like you don't want to get up out of bed. You don't want to go do things. It's really difficult. It feels like it's always hanging on to you. And it results in intense feelings of fear and lack of control. So a lot of times we're afraid that we can't respond to situations in a healthy way. I know for me, when I was going through having my PTSD outbursts, I felt like I couldn't control myself. And it was almost this fear I had of my inability to control myself. Same thing when I would have panic attacks. I would have a panic attack worried I was going to get a panic attack. It leaves people feeling helpless. So they don't always know how to respond or what to do. They feel like there's nothing that they can do. They're just stuck. It changes the way a person understands themselves, the world, and others. So it changes how they interact. It changes how they trust. It affects whether or not they feel safe in certain spaces or any space at all, because they don't the understanding of the world has completely shifted. Okay, so hope that was somewhat helpful, at least. I have been trying to really make clear that trauma is a real thing. I know we use these words a lot, and we don't really know what they mean. We just use them. Like even the word toxic is another one of those words people use, and they don't really know what it means. And we'll get into that in a second, also what toxic stress is and all of that, because that's a real thing. I'm trying to see if there's a way I can do this. Share my, there we go. Okay. Let's see. Oops. Let's see. I'll go back. Okay, went over that. Also, it breaches attachments of family, friendship, and community. That means that essentially you don't feel like you can trust your family. A lot of times you just disconnect. Or sometimes you become angry with people and you don't even realize you're reacting a certain way. It shatters the construction of the self that is formed and sustained in relation to others. How you view yourself is altered. A lot of times, for example, when we talk to people who might be survivors of a sexual assault or sexual abuse, they often talk about how they see themselves as being worthless and valueless. Because if someone can just take advantage of them, and then for them to either not get justice or not feel safe after, or have even been taken care of, it completely shatters how you feel about yourself. It completely makes you feel like you're not valued, you're not worthy of being helped or saved, or you're not even worthy of justice. So it's a very difficult space to be in. Undermines the belief system that gives meaning to human experience. So essentially, you kind of live in this consistent feeling that being a human, being alive sucks, essentially. Anything that you believed in that made your life feel like it was worthwhile pretty much gone. It undermines that. So let's say you believe that your purpose in life was to, maybe grow vegetables for your community and help your community become healthier. Essentially, you lose so much of that because it's like, okay, I don't even believe this is necessary anymore. It violates the victim's faith in a natural or divine order and casts the victim into a state of existential crisis. So a lot of times people, they don't know what is the meaning of life. I don't understand it. Why am I here? I don't understand my existence. Is my existence even purposeful? It also shatters basic trust, a sense of alienation, and disconnection pervades every relationship. So this is from a book called Trauma and Recovery by Judith Herman. That's why that citation's there at the bottom. Let's see. Now, the other thing I want to also point out that not everyone goes on to develop trauma. Some people are resilient and they may not need any intervention. Some people they can deal with situations. Some people, they're not traumatized by everything. Two people can experience the exact same situation and one person could come out traumatized and the other person be totally fine. So it's very dependent upon the person. A lot of it has to do with how you were nurtured as a child and whether or not you felt safe growing up, and if you feel secure in relationship and secure in your life in general. Hope that makes sense for folks. Back to you guys. I'm still trying to learn how to do all of this, going back and forth between the screens. So please forgive me if this looks awkward. I don't know, can you guys even see me when I'm putting the slides up? Because I cannot see you guys at all. I'm gonna go into the chat. All right, shout out to Gold Link, by the way. I meant to say what up to you earlier. I know I did use your point, but I wanted to make sure I said what up. So what up, Gold Link? Gold Link. Scaredom Crew. Hi, what's up? Shout out to you. I'm glad you like it so far. Garfield Compton, 666. What up? See, what else? Gold Link, will you be going into trauma passed down from family and how that affects childhood trauma? Yes. So I will be talking about intergenerational trauma and epigenetics briefly, but I will talk about it because it's definitely part of all this conversation. And this can be a long show. I'm trying not to make it too long because this gets really deep. This gets really deep. Shout out to BL. Shout out to Rock the Mic. Good night. It's okay if you this will be up later, so you can always watch this later. If you guys cannot stay up tonight, I understand. Don't worry, this will be up. I see a lot of people. I don't have a lot of people in today. I just hope you guys are getting the information. If there are questions so far, please put them in the chat. What up, MVE Power? MVM Power. I hope I'm saying it right. What up to you? That's the homie from Twitter. So let's get into some more of these slides. So hopefully you guys have somewhat of an understanding of trauma, at least an overview, a little bit about what that is and how we're discussing it here. Again, a lot of the terms I use, I'm going to be using, such as toxic or trauma or even resilience. So some of these are terms you might have seen on your Twitter timeline or just seen out in life or heard people talking about them. The way I talk about them in this is in the actual mental health sense. I'm not using it in the trendy, online conversation sense, because they call things toxic that have nothing to do with being toxic. So just want to make sure I'm clear on that. Also, everything isn't a trauma. That's why I wanted to be clear on how we're defining what a trauma is. Let's get back to you guys. Let's see. I'm trying to get better at this, y'all. I wish I could see what you guys could see, but I can't. All right, so factors mediating trauma responses. So what this means is there are certain factors that can contribute to how someone responds to a trauma. So, for example, the age of the individual or where they are in their developmental stage, okay? So if the person is 5 years old or mentally 5 years old, they're gonna have a different response than someone who's 25 years old, right? For one thing, how they can make sense of the world is very different. Your experience at 25 is a lot different than your experience at 5. Perfect example. This sounds it's kind of a funny story, but it's not really. So I had an old coworker who would share this story about this goose. when she was a child, she had a family picnic. And at the family picnic, they had this pond and had a lot of geese there. And she was about maybe 3 or 4 years old. And at 3 or 4 years old, a goose is about as big as you are. So she's at this pond, she's playing around. One of the geese decide to chase her. So she's chasing and she's being chased and she's running and she's screaming and she's crying and she's terrified. Now, all the adults around her are laughing, ha 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 ha, that's so cute, ha ha ha, because at their developmental stage, that's not traumatic. For a 4-year-old, that's pretty damn traumatic because in a 4-year-old's brain, they're about to die. We don't think of it that way because we just think, oh, they'll get over it. We don't think about how that might affect them as they get older. Not only maybe how they feel about animals, but how do they feel about the adults around them that let them suffer and laughed as they were traumatized? Because we don't think of it that way. A lot of times we think of just the situation from our adult brains. So your developmental stage and your age have a huge impact on how you respond to trauma. The frequency, duration, and nature and predictability of the trauma impacts how you respond. The level of the invasiveness. What was the level of the invasiveness of that trauma? The degree of associated violence and physical harm. The nature of the relationship with the abuser. For example, a caregiver, a trusted adult versus a stranger. So one thing we know is that people who are victimized are usually victimized by people that they know, right? So how does that affect your ability to trust the spaces you're in if there are people that you know that are capable of hurting you or traumatizing you? Your cultural, gender, and systemic context. So a lot of that plays a huge role because how do you even perceive the situation? Do you have the spaces and the resources to get through it? So for example, if you're in poverty, you might not have the same resources if your house burned down than somebody whose house burned down that wasn't in poverty. They might have had great insurance, they can recover a lot quicker, but the trauma for you is probably ongoing because of that. And so your response to that is going to be a lot different. Meaning attached to the trauma experience, how you make sense of what happened. Degree to which adults, organizations are validating versus disbelieving. Are the people around you dismissing you or do they believe you? That can impact the way in which you respond to trauma. So, let me stop sharing. Okay. Hope I'm doing this right. Oh, there we go. Okay, I can do it that way. Awesome. So does this make sense to you guys, I hope? Let me see if there's anyone in the chat. You guys are asking any questions, making sense so far. I became super vigilant, looking for threats everywhere and learned to expertly mimic and act how people would accept me. So I was never my true self. Scared 'em crew. Let me tell you, that is extremely, extremely common. So that's pretty much how many of us respond. So we have something in our brains called the amygdala. When we have certain traumatic experiences, our brain now says, be prepared for danger. So your amygdala, which is basically the alarm system that sets off your fear response system, starts going off, even though you might not actually be in danger. But because of what your experiences were before, your brain says, uh-oh, this looks familiar, keep myself safe. And sometimes our reactions might be something like appease. So survival responses can be fight, flight, freeze, and appease. So maybe one of your responses is, how do I make sure that I'm safe? Well, one of those ways is by making sure the people around me feel good, feel okay with me being here, are accepting me. A lot of times parents teach us that, right? As long as we do what the parents want, as long as they like us and they tell us we did a good job, we get love. If we don't, we're met with dismay, punishment, maybe even violence. Rocks the mic says, though I'm late, I struggle with how people project their trauma in uniformity on Twitter, completely devoid of nuance or meaningful critique. I could see that, I think, but I would kind of need a clear-cut example to kind of be able to dissect that point. If anyone has an example of that, that will make it a little bit easier for me to dissect that point. I'm pretty sure you're right, though. I just have to kind of make sure I understand you clearly. Benjamin says, come across this a lot in early childhood education work. Thanks for doing this stream. Thank you, Benjamin. Yeah, I actually train a lot of childhood educators. So this is what a lot of this content is from. Charles says, I think that says Charles, watching at work, soaking all this in. Thanks. Glad you guys are soaking it in. I'm so glad this is meaningful for you guys. It makes me feel a lot better about doing this, because I do worry whether or not this is something that is useful for you. So as long as it's useful, I'm happy. All right. Can you guys see that okay? I hope you guys can. So PTSD in children. The Casey Northwest Foster Care Alumni Study, which came out in 2005, revealed that people who had been in foster care as children had higher rates of PTSD than returning US war veterans. So children in foster care have higher rates of PTSD at a rate of 25%. That's 1 in 4. And I believe that's probably an underdiagnosis. I'm just an underdiagnosis. And they have more PTSD than US war veterans. That's pretty wild if you think about it. So this is kind of what someone was talking about before, intergenerational trauma. So one of the ways that we can, these are ways we look at intergenerational trauma, and these are the ways intergenerational trauma exists. Slavery and colonization. That's an intergenerational trauma. Just because the actual act of slavery or colonialization, which neither have really ended, but let's just say that they ended, even if they had, the impact of that never ended. Collective trauma is real. Holocaust and genocide survivors, of course, survivors of catastrophic natural disasters, because we forget, again, how that can impact how your parents might react, how they might behave, and then the way that they're behaving towards you. Imprisonment, incarceration in the home is traumatic for children and is intergenerational trauma, because it is a trauma that is constantly passed down. Forced displacement. So let's say that, you're a refugee, something like that. Trafficking, of course, domestic violence, physical, emotional, and sexual abuse. Now, all trauma is intergenerational unless it is healed. What does that mean? It means unless you're healing your trauma, you can pass down that trauma. You can continue a cycle that's very, very dangerous. Another thing about intergenerational trauma, we can talk about these 3 things here. Epigenetics. So I'm going to talk a little bit about epigenetics in detail. So let me get out of here a little bit. Oops. Get back to you guys so I can see you guys. So epigenetics. So this is essentially a study that's came out. I hope I'm quoting this study right. But essentially, they found that Holocaust survivors' grandchildren were being diagnosed with PTSD and having similar symptoms as their grandparents who had been in the Holocaust. But despite them having not been in the Holocaust, biologically, their DNA was literally altered. That's what epigenetics is. And I want to say the Holocaust was what, 10, 15 years? And that's probably way more than it actually was. Slavery was almost 300 years. And then there's another 100 years of lynching after that. So we're talking 400 years of trauma. 400 years of slavery and lynching. And then we move into today. What are we seeing today? When did the trauma end? So that trauma not only is passed down socially, it is passed down genetically. our DNA is altered to be able to withstand the new situation. So basically it's adaptation. Your body's constantly adapting to its environment. Another example is something called the Dutch famine study. And essentially what happened was it was during the, I think it was World War II or World War I, Hitler had cut off the food supply to Holland. And they went into a famine. So all the women who were in their third trimester of their pregnancy during this famine, when the war was over and they had their children, almost all of those children grew up to become obese. Why? Because their bodies were being prepared for the environment it's about to live in. This is why the experiences of your ancestors and the experiences of your mother while she's pregnant with you have an effect on your physical and mental health. So for example, and this kind of goes to my other point, my next point that I'm going to go into, because it's all connected. So let's get into this next slide, stress in utero. So stress in utero is basically the stress your mother's feeling when she's pregnant with you. So I always give myself as an example. I always use my own story, so don't be shocked when I tell you some of my stories. But my mother was pregnant with me when my father was physically abusing her. I come out and I basically have anxiety issues because my body was being prepared to live in a war zone. My brain and body said be hypervigilant. A lot of times our children, Black children in particular, are diagnosed with things like ADHD because they're hyperactive, and we don't take into account the trauma that they might have experienced even in utero, or the trauma they experienced after they were born. And that's affecting their hyperreactiveness. It's not because they have some disorder, it's because they've been traumatized. So your experiences in your mother's womb has an effect on you, as well as stress when you're a baby. So stress caught, and that's stress caught essentially is basically like when a baby is like in another room and they can hear their parents fighting, the babies get stressed out. People don't know that. Babies stress out when they hear loud noises, when they hear arguing, they hear fighting. So they become hurt. They won't say hurt, but they develop stress. And the thing about stress in your developmental stages is it's very, very unhealthy and very dangerous. It causes a lot of other health issues. Let's see, make sure I'm. Also, let's talk a little bit about attachment. So let me get to this slide so you guys can see it. So there's also attachment. So the thing about attachment is that has an effect on how you connect with your parents. So the way in which your parents interact with you is attachment. The way that you connect with them, the way that you build with them, that has a direct effect on how you attach to others in the future. So, for example, if you come from a household that's abusive or there's a lot of disconnection, chances are, unless you heal it for yourself, you're going to pass that on. If you look at your behaviors now, and in fact, as an adult, do you ever look at your behaviors, whether you like them or not, and you realize that you got it from your parents? Well, chances are your parents got it from their parents too. Again, unless you heal it, it's going to become intergenerational. Single incident trauma. So that's an event out of the blue, such as an accident, natural disaster, witnessing violence, single episode of abuse or assault. So that's one-time thing, not to say it's better than any other trauma, but it's a particular trauma that is just for that one moment. Complex trauma or developmental trauma is subjection to a totalitarian control over a prolonged period of time. Examples include hostages, prisoners of war, and concentration camp survivors. And I also want to include that it's not just concentration camp survivors and prisoners of war and hostages, it's also children being raised in abusive households. Because they're in totalitarian control over a prolonged period of time, and especially in their development. So complex trauma, there's actually another PTSD, that's the form that I have, it's called complex PTSD. That's essentially the result of not just a single incident, it's the result of years and years of trauma. Excuse me, guys. I'm not going to show this video because it's on YouTube and I don't want to get us in any trouble. But I really think you guys should Google this. It's called the still face experiment. I love this video because it shows you exactly how your baby reacts to your lack of attention and your lack of interaction. Because as human beings, we literally need that interaction. So in this video, the researcher tells the mom to play with the baby. And they play with the baby. She talks and plays with the baby. Then the researcher says, turn around and then come back and then don't interact. Have a completely blank face. And you'll begin to see the baby behave in certain ways to try to get the mother's attention. They point, they screech, trying to get the mom to respond. Mom's looking at them, but mom is just no interaction. So the baby begins to become super stressed out. The mom isn't interacting and playing anymore and starts crying. Now, oftentimes when I talk about this study, I mean, this particular video, I often highlight something that people don't pay attention to. The baby's reacting to the lack of attention from the parent, and they started crying and having a fit. This may be it was like maybe a 1.5-year-old baby. So it wasn't even 2 yet. But I always think about the literal reaction, the emotional distress that they were in, and how we interpret that. As a baby, we go, oh, baby just needs love and attention. But how does that response look when they feel like they're being dismissed when they're 3 years old? What does it look like when they're 5 years old? What does that response look like when they're 10 or 16? The 16-year-old might not cry and point and all of that, but they're going to have a reaction when their need is not being met from their primary caregiver. What does that look like? Nobody's going to say to the baby, oh, you're tantruming. Look at you acting like that because your mother doesn't give you attention. You just want attention. Look at you. Nobody does that to a baby, right? We do it to children all the time, even though they're having the exact same response. Let's look at this chat room, see what y'all saying up in here. Woo, y'all got a lot of stuff in here. Okay. Oh, what's up, Colonel COVID Gaddafi? Kill that COVID. I don't have COVID, I promise you. How do we get more Black people to parent more healthily? A lot of people had abusive parents, but it was so enough that we didn't realize it. Okay, this goes back to what we were talking about before. I don't think you were here yet, but we were talking about the fact that we've normalized certain things. So we don't notice it because we've normalized it. We think it's totally fine for our parents to hit us. In fact, we think it's the Black way to parent. That's what we've told ourselves. How do we get more Black people to parent more healthily? Well, we have to get Black parents to heal. There's no way around that. So a lot of my friends who believed in spanking and family members, shout out to my cousin, they were strong believers in spanking children. I mean, strong. We would be on Facebook writing essays to each other because my cousin was just adamant she believed in hitting kids. She had 3, just 3 kids now. Now, after her own healing, addressing her own trauma, having been in an unhealthy, narcissistic, codependent relationship, and then having to step back and say, okay, what's going on with me? As she began to heal herself, she began to interact differently with her children. She started to realize a lot of her issues came from how she was parented. All the essays I wrote in the world didn't mean shit. All the links and videos and studies I sent her didn't mean a goddamn thing. Not a single goddamn thing. But when she started to heal on her own, started to address the ways her childhood impacted the way she saw herself in her relationships, she realized she had to make a change with her own children. So that's how we get more Black parents to parent healthily, healing themselves. There's no way around that. Speaking of generational trauma, it's why I have such loathing, but it's weird. I grew up being raised to be the respectable Black guy, but it only hurt me over time. Yeah, I mean, the reality is your childhood is going to have a huge impact on you. But the dope thing is, as an adult, you can start making changes in your life. That's the dope thing. So I don't want you guys to walk away feeling like, oh, my parents ruined me. Your parents did not ruin you. You're not ruined. Okay? Take a step back, and now you have the opportunity to break this cycle if you want. It's up to you. Will poverty be considered a complex trauma? It can. It absolutely can. We're going to talk a little bit more about that too when I get deeper into the ACEs part, because none of this is absent of social determinants. Okay, so none of this is absent of that. We're going to get deeper into that. If y'all follow me enough, you know we're not going to get out of that part. We need interaction. Does this mean loneliness can be traumatic? Not only is loneliness traumatic, it is deadly. It is so fucking harmful. One of the most cruel things you can do is that solitary confinement, the shit that they do in prisons. It's like literally one of the worst things you could possibly do. It's so horrific. Yes, we literally, biologically, neurologically, physiologically need human interaction, and we need human touch. This is a fact, and there's no way around that. So yes, loneliness can be traumatic, absolutely. Because we have to remember things like acknowledgement, affection, connection, attention are neurological, biological human needs. They're basic human needs. And you only get that with interaction from other people. So how can you get your need for attention met if you're not interacting? If you're lonely? People say, I don't need attention. That's bullshit. Everybody needs attention. I don't care. You might not need everybody's attention, but just people in your life whose attention you want. If you were walking around and you got ignored all day, meaning nobody acknowledged your presence, nobody took your money when you went to the cash register, you were nothing, and that was your life, you would literally go crazy. If you didn't have internet interacting, some of you guys would go completely nuts. So interaction is definitely a human need. Loneliness can raise stress hormones, so it can be destructive. Absolutely. And we're going to get into how the stress hormones is what causes a lot of our diseases. I might have that kind of trauma if it's real. Oh, it's real. So maybe you do. What traumatized me was that I was punished because I recognized that being a Carlton-ass dude hurt me socially. The argument was that none of that mattered, just that I did good by white folks. Yeah, it's a tough thing to have to deal with. And a lot of parents, they really believe that's the way that things should be. They really do. The Russian abandonment situation. I don't think I know that story. Oh, you're talking about the orphans. The orphans, yes. I know what you're talking about. You're talking about the one where they have the sensory deprivation? I think I know, and you're right. It's a Russian orphan study. I think I might have that in this slide. I'll have to double check. Is the cry it out negative? Yeah, cry it out is kind of dumb. The thing about, I'm not going to say it's wrong to cry, but a lot of times when people say cry it out, it's because they're being dismissive. Now, if you're saying cry it out as you're holding your child or something, or hugging your friend, that's different. But sometimes people say just cry it out, meaning go over there and do that. That's harmful. Empathy is extremely healing for people. Extremely. Also, the cry it out for babies, they'll say, let the baby cry and you don't want to hold them. Not only is it negative, it's harmful and is the beginning of attachment issues, literally the beginning in their infancy. So you are not supposed to let your baby cry. They're not going to get stronger and become more independent if you just let them sit in there and cry. Actually, their hormones, their stress hormones are increasing, their oxytocin levels are lessening, and they're becoming extremely unhealthy, and it makes it difficult for them to learn as they get older. and it inhibits a lot of their development, and it hurts their relationship with you. So if your baby is crying, go to them, hug them, feed them, change them, whatever they need. If they just need you to rock them, you rock them. They're babies. I don't care what these people are telling you about, oh, they're going to be spoiled. You cannot spoil your child with love. It's not a thing. You cannot spoil your child with love. Can you coddle a child? Yes. But that's different than what I'm talking about. Empowering your child is important. And as they get older, you can do that. But if they're babies, hug them and kiss them, help them to feel better. It literally is healing for their bodies. That oxytocin floods their system. It's basically like brain vitamins. And they bond closer to you, and they feel safer in relationship. What up, Isaac? What up? What up? Even the threat of spanking. Oh man, I hate when I do this. I'm terrible at this. Yeah, even the threat of spanking is enough to mess up a kid. Yes, yes, yes. Oh, I forgot I can just do this, huh? See, I'm getting better at this. So yeah, even the threat of spanking is enough to mess up a kid. Absolutely. Yeah. Threatening your child is never really a good idea. And that doesn't make you a terrible parent if you do. Let me clarify that. Nothing I'm saying means that you're a terrible parent. It just means that we need different tools in our toolbox. That is all. You are doing the best you can with the tools that you have, and you should be proud of yourself for that. And as you get more tools and get more knowledge, you can do things differently. Okay? So I never want anyone to walk away from here thinking I'm saying that they're a bad parent. I am not saying you're a bad parent. I'm saying you're doing the best you can with what you have. Loneliness is deadly as a child or an adult, both. And by deadly, I don't even necessarily mean like your heart stops beating, but your mind pretty much is gone. And as a baby, absolutely deadly. Isn't that a study? Who remembers the infant study where they basically didn't touch the babies? There was no physical touch. They made sure they clothed them. They made sure they were fed, but they had no physical touch, and all the babies died. Well, the screwy thing is, I really all I can change is my job. Is really the social dynamics around here never changed ever. I mean, I don't know what to tell you. You have to. There's really nothing anyone can do outside of yourself. There's nothing else. If you can't do it, you have to make the changes for yourself. So if your job is what you have to change your job. If your housing situation is what you have to change your housing situation. Whatever you got to do to keep yourself safe as an adult, you should do that. Let's see. Yes, imagine people not acknowledging you, being comfortable around you, ignoring you, avoiding eye contact, and then you react, they vilify you. Absolutely. And this is something that Black people deal with all the time. And this is why when I teach my trauma stuff, it's important that I'm clear about the audience I'm speaking to. Black trauma, it plays out differently, right? This is the kind of shit, and I'll say specifically Black boys. I've seen this with Black boys. They get ignored, they get dismissed, people feel afraid around them. They don't look them in the eye. They don't even show them respect. And then when these boys in these classrooms or react to how you treat them, oh, you're overreacting. Why are you acting that way? They've been mistreated since they walked through the door. I've seen this in schools over and over and over again. Absolutely. And these are the kind of traumas that we deal with. Some of you guys have heard me mention educational trauma. That's what I'm talking about when I talk about Black children experiencing educational trauma. So not only have we been traumatized generationally, not only are we continuing the cycle of trauma in our homes, and then we're sending them out into the world to continue traumatizing them. How many lives has that spare the rod, spoil the child mentality harmed? Yeah. What's interesting is Black people think that it's their thing, and they don't realize where they got it from. A lot of places that have been enslaved and colonized by Europeans have this strong belief in spanking. And a lot of it has to do not because of their own cultural traditions, but because of that domination and colonization and enslavement. It was literally what we did to keep our children safe. If you didn't beat your child in front of the slave master, they might beat him and they might kill him. So if I don't beat him, master will. If I don't beat him, the police might, or the police will. We've heard it all. We've heard it all. I see a lot of questions. Do these traumas impact boys more than girls? It's not no. It's not that they impact anybody differently based off of gender. That's not, no. A lot of, depending on the trauma, the response to it might be impacted based on, your gender, your economic situation, your access to resources, your age. A lot of these things can impact your reaction, but traumas and the impact of trauma is really based on the individual. Again, like I said before, two boys can have the same experience, and one end up traumatized and one not. So it's really just the individual and who they are, their experiences, their ability, their resilience. Has resilience been instilled in them? Some people are naturally resilient, and some people, they think they're resilient. They just haven't seen how their trauma has played out in their lives. Like they'll say, oh no, I'm resilient. I don't care that my parents spanked me, but yet you can't keep a healthy relationship to save your life. No, you haven't missed too much. You're good. Island buoy. Yeah, so let's get back to the slideshow. Let's get back there. Let's see what we're doing. No, you haven't missed too much. You good. Let me go back to a slideshow. I'm trying to get better at this, guys, and I will be quicker. I think I've got a little bit better from when I first started doing this. So attachment for survival. The reason why we attach and the reason why we connect is because we need it to survive. As babies, we are completely dependent on our primary caregivers for our survival. So that attachment is extremely strong. So this is Russian. You said Russian, it's Romanian. So I think we're talking about the same thing though. These are the brains of 2-3-year-old children. The image on the left is from a healthy child, while the image on the right is from a Romanian orphan who suffered severe sensory deprivation. The right brain is smaller and has enlarged ventricles, which are holes in the center of the brain. It also shows a shrunken cortex, which is the brain's outer layer. So if you look, hopefully I can do this in a way that makes sense to you guys. If you guys look at the brain on the left, that's a normal brain, normal healthy child's brain. You see how small those ventricles are, those holes are. You see how thick that outer layer is. That cortex is where impulse control is, your analytical thinking. So the healthy child is developing in a normal way. And the child that has sensory deprivation and neglect, that child, meaning this is a child who was basically left alone and didn't have support and didn't have love and connection and any of that. So because of that, they had a shrunken cortex, or their ability to control their impulses, their ability to learn was less than the child with the healthy brain. Okay. It's really important that we think about the ways in which your literal brain development is impacted by your experiences as a baby and as a child. So we have expectations from children who've experienced horrific abuse, and we tell them, oh, they just have to get over it and just work hard. And we don't even realize their brain development has been basically underdeveloped. Their brain has been underdeveloped. Yeah, as you guys saying, it's scary. Absolutely. Let's see. Y'all on Champagne Sharks have really made me consider how negative Christianity has been culturally for Black people. I can get deeper into that, but that's a whole nother show. For those of you guys who don't know, I'm an atheist. I was raised very religious, and I have a whole nother point around the impact that Christianity has had on Black people. But yes, absolutely. Yeah, if I'm assuming, I don't know if you mean religion or if you mean hitting, but either way, I agree with you. Yeah, so let's get back to the slideshow. Okay, so now this is on the left. Again, it's a healthy brain. So this is the PET scan of the brain of a normal child. And if you it shows the regions of high red and low blue and black activity. At birth, only primitive structures such as the brainstem are fully functional. In regions like the temporal lobes, which is the top that's circled right there, in regions like the temporal lobes, top early childhood experiences wire the circuits. So if you look at those circled areas, you can see that the temporal lobes are connected, it's healthy, it's functional. And then if you look to the right of the abused brain, what do you see? A lot of holes. The PET scan of the brain of a Romanian orphan who was institutionalized shortly after birth shows the effect of extreme deprivation in infancy. The temporal lobes at the top, which regulate emotions and receive input from the senses, are nearly, I can never say this word right, quiescent or quiescent, meaning it's basically gone. Such children suffer emotional and cognitive problems. So, and we're going to talk about this as a group right now. How do you think developmental trauma might impact relationships? And how do you think they might impact your sense of safety? And this last question is a little tricky because I didn't go over the answer to this. But how do you think it could make you susceptible to more trauma? So I'm curious to see how you guys are answering these questions. So I want to go back to you guys. Thank you so much to I Am Just Jules. I appreciate that for your donation. Big shout out to you. Thank you. Let's see. I didn't know trauma affected our brain like that. Good Lord, is it possible for it to be repaired? Yes, your brain is plastic, and there is healing that can take place. Meditation is one of those ways people use to help heal and help to regulate their nervous system and begin to develop these pathways. And exercise is another way. There are things you can do that to help thicken the hippocampus in your brain and to also renew cells. Absolutely. So you're not doomed forever if you've had trauma. So please don't think that. But yes, it does affect your brain. And this is why I try to explain to people about how you raise your children and the way that you interact with your children and how that impacts the way that they learn at school. I never understood beating your child because they have bad grades. I don't get it. I think it's the dumbest shit ever. It makes absolutely no sense. It's clearly they are struggling. Even if they're lacking in effort, there's a reason why they lack motivation. Beating them is not motivation. It's fear. And fear and motivation are not the same thing. We like to say it is, but it's not the same thing. Because fear is reactional. It goes into survival part of your brain. Motivation is cortex, that's planning, that's analytical. They're not even a part of the same parts of your brain. So we get that idea that fear is motivation is no, it's not. Fear is fear. And also, fear doesn't have the long-lasting impact of motivation. Let's see. But I am curious to know, you guys, so the way that the way trauma impacts relationship, how do you feel safe in relationship if the people that raised you mistreated you or made you feel consistently unsafe? How do you feel good in your relationship with your boyfriend, girlfriend, or whatever partner, right? How do you build friendships? Have you heard people say, I hear people brag about the fact that they don't have friends. I ain't got no friends. I can't trust nobody. Da, 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 da. That's their trauma speaking. Everybody wants friendship. Everyone. Everyone wants love and connection. Shouting from the rooftop that you don't want it is bullshit. In fact, shouting from the rooftop that you don't need it tells us how badly you need it. So it has a direct impact on how we connect with others. As far as your sense of safety, how do you think that impacts your sense of safety? How do you feel comfortable going to certain places? I have like a lot of, growing up in the hood, I meet, just a lot of my male friends, certain places they don't feel good about. I have male friends that completely freak out if I drive through an alley. If you have friends who were in the street life or had a lot of shit going on, sometimes I'll be out with them and they're constantly looking around. They never feel safe. So some shit could pop off at any moment. And that's a real feeling. That's a real trauma. So how do you ever feel safe in a classroom? I remember when I used to try to meditate and I could not feel safe meditating. I would be in a room, they'd be like, oh, we're gonna have a group meditation. Wait, you want me to close my eyes around all these people I don't even fucking know? Oh, hell no. And I just sit there looking at all these motherfuckers. I'm not closing my eyes. I don't know you niggas. Because I just didn't feel safe with people around me and I didn't know what was happening, right? So basically it's your ability to trust yourself and your space is completely gone. There's a reason why Black men tend to be less talkative than Black women in general. I don't know, maybe. I think generally speaking, men tend to be less talkative than women. So I couldn't tell you if there's a correlation. Maybe there is. But I will say, generally speaking, men don't speak as much as women. But it's possibly true. I don't really know. People suffer. A partner with abandonment issues is hard to deal with. It's a sad thing. The funny thing is a lot of Black people have abandonment issues. So sometimes we got to be a little patient with our folk. And we have to help them understand that it's an abandonment issue. There's a lot of fear in losing someone that you love. Sometimes we go above and beyond and we do so much trying to make someone happy at the expense of our own, our own emotions, our own needs. And in fact, we'll make ourselves martyrs for sacrificing. Oh, I just gave and gave and gave and gave, not realizing that's your abandonment issue playing out. So let's get back to the slides. Oh, I didn't go over this one. So how does this impact your susceptibility to further trauma? And it was a statement that we used earlier today. I'm hoping you guys can give me the word. It starts with an N. How can you be susceptible to more trauma? Isaac says Black women are given much more room to be expressive both within the home and outside the home. Maybe. I honestly don't know if that's true because that was not the case in my house at all. Not even close to a little bit. Women were to be shut the fuck up in our house, in my house. So I don't know. I really, and I understand my life in my household is different than a lot of other families. So I'm not trying to say my way is the way, but I'm saying I can't relate to that point because that was not the case in my house, not even close. But I do believe that outside the home, women in general are given more space to speak, but Black boys are definitely never given a space to speak, ever. So I definitely do agree that outside of the home, for sure. Again, I can't speak to other people's homes in that regard because I didn't witness it. But definitely outside of the home, 100% agree with you. And to be fair, also not to be fair, but to also point out, even when Black girls are being expressive and we say that's a good thing, it's usually held against them. So it's not like it's something that's good for us. It's us expressing things is safe for us either. A lot of times it's used against us, either to manipulate us or to guilt us or to shame us. So there's a catch to that. If you're Black, there's a big catch to that. I think sometimes there's illusion, even amongst Black women who they believe that certain things are progress for us, and really it's not. Like being the backbone of the Democratic Party is not progress. Like that's us shooting ourselves in the foot. So a lot of times we think things are benefits for Black girls and they're not. So that's also the other thing. Neuroplasticity. Yeah, that's the word I was looking for. Neuroplasticity. So the way that you're susceptible to more trauma, that's not the word I was looking for actually. Now I'm thinking about it. So it starts with an N. The word I was looking for was normalized. The reason why you become susceptible to further trauma is because the trauma has been normalized. If you've been sexually abused a good chunk of your childhood, you're probably going to be sexually abused again later on in your life because you're more susceptible to it. If you've been sexually abused as a child, even one time, there's actually studies that show if you've been sexually abused as a child, there's chances are you're going to be sexually assaulted again later in your life. And it's something that people don't know about because we don't understand, especially sexual assault victims in particular, or survivors. A lot of us have experienced it as a child. So what happens is our ability to sense danger is off. So one of the trauma responses that occur is danger cues being off. You're so used to being violated, you don't know when you're being violated until it's too late. Meaning your amygdala in your brain, that your response system that's supposed to go off when you're in danger or sense danger, it doesn't know when to kick in. It kicks in when it's too late. And that's essentially what happened with the Harvey Weinstein victims. People like to say, so, well, what did these girls go to that room for? Why did they do this and why did they do that? And what you'll find, a lot of those Harvey Weinstein survivors were also abused in their childhood. I know this because I actually work with someone who's a part of an organization. I know someone who's a Weinstein survivor, and they have a group that they all talk and communicate, and they're working on some stuff together. And a lot of them they found had been abused as children. So the thing about people like Harvey Weinstein and other narcissists and things like that is they can sense those people. Because when you've been victimized in that way, it's like you have a big V on your forehead. You don't know it's there. But there are certain ways that you behave, you interact, maybe you're overly appeasing. Maybe you don't trust people. So they're like, oh, if I can separate her, she doesn't trust anybody anyway. No one's going to save her or protect her. Now, none of these are conscious thoughts, and you're not even aware of it. But because you're so used to the narcissism, you're used to abuse, you're used to being victimized, your brain doesn't say, oh, wait a minute, I'm in danger until it's too late. So you become susceptible to more trauma. I hope that makes sense and it wasn't too complex. I see there's a lot of conversation. I'm trying to see what you guys are talking about in the chat room. Yeah, I'm not quite sure what you guys are saying in the chat room. Hopefully I can catch up in a minute. But back to the slideshow. Let's get back to that. So let's get into this study. I have told you guys repeatedly to watch this video. I know y'all have not watched it yet. If you guys have not watched this video, it's on YouTube. Just look her up, Nadine Burke Harris. She is now currently the California Surgeon General, the first one we've ever had. And she's focusing on childhood trauma. And there's a lot of money coming down the pipeline to address childhood trauma as an epidemic. So that's what she's doing. A lot of this lecture is a TED Talk. It's on YouTube. Just look up Average Childhood Experiences Study or look up her name, and you'll find that video. I can't play it on here because it's already on YouTube and it's owned by TED Talk. But definitely watch that. Definitely watch that video. She goes into more detail about this study that I'm about to go over with you right now. So the Adverse Childhood Experiences Study. This is a study that showed that your experiences as a child have a direct impact on your health as an adult. So this study was conducted in 1995, from 1995 to 1997. It was over 17,000 patients during the general screening. 70% of these participants were white. 70% were college educated. So we're already seeing this is a privileged group in America. Even amongst this privileged group, 67% reported at least one ACE. Now, this is where I'm going to get into what an ACE is. What is an ACE? An ACE is a point that you get every time you answer yes to one of these questions. Do you guys see this here? Hopefully you guys can see it. Oh, you guys don't see it. Move. No. Add another string. Share screen. Chrome tab. There we go. Now we're here. Now you guys can see it, hopefully. Yeah? But I'll make it bigger for you guys so you guys can see it. Can you guys see it? I don't know if that's any better. Let's see if I can zoom in. Do you guys see it now? Let's see. Yeah. Okay. Hopefully you guys can see that. So this is, thank you, Dub G. I appreciate that. I have to stop and say thank you for that. Thank you. So finding your ACE score. So an ACE is essentially a point you get whenever you answer yes to any of these questions here. So the questions include things like, did a parent or other adult in the household often or very often swear at you, insult you, put you down, or humiliate you? Then you put yes, if that's true, or no, if it's not true. Every time you answer one of these questions, there's 10 questions on this test. Anytime you answer a question yes, you get a point. And at the end, you get to add up your total ACE score. Okay? So that's what that is. So let me add this other, get back to this. Okay, so 67 reported at least one ACE. If you had one ACE, 1 point, you probably had another one. 87% chance that you had at least one more. You had at least a score of 2 on that test, meaning you had 2 adverse experiences as a child. Out of that group, 1 in 8 had a score of 4 or more. Now, when you have a score of 4 or more, that's when we start to get into the health issues, and we'll get into that in a second. So what is an adverse experience? How are they measuring adverse experiences? They're looking at verbal abuse, physical abuse, emotional abuse, sexual abuse, emotional or physical neglect, mother is treated violently, an alcohol and or drug abuser in the household, an incarcerated household member, someone who is chronically depressed, mentally ill, institutionalized, or suicidal, or has one or no parents. So these are adverse experiences. Now, mind you, these aren't the only adverse experiences that exist, but these are the ones that they're testing in this study. These are the ones that you can also learn about. These are also the things that they ask about in the questionnaire if you were to take it. So they have different types of ACEs. There's abuse, looking at neglect, and they're looking at household dysfunction. So we're looking at physical abuse, emotional abuse, sexual abuse. We're looking at neglect, whether it's physical neglect or emotional neglect. Yes, emotional neglect is a trauma. A lot of times, parents who have mental health issues or depression and things like that, they don't realize it sometimes, but they're engaging in emotional neglect. Household dysfunction, such as mental illness, incarcerated relative, mother treated violently, substance abuse, or divorce. I can't think people don't understand about divorce with children. When children miss a parent, it's like they died. Their body reacts as though their parent has died. It's literally that heavy of a grief. And divorce is really traumatic for children. So like I said, the first question is, did a parent or other adult in the household often or very often swear at you, insult you, put you down, or humiliate you? If you guys want this questionnaire, you can go online. I go to acesconnection.com and they have the questionnaire there, or you can just Google ACEs questionnaire and you can find it. Possible risk outcomes. So here are the outcomes of adverse childhood experiences. You see that there are behavioral outcomes, such as the lack of physical activity, usually connected with depression, smoking, alcoholism, drug use, and missing work, meaning you tend to struggle with keeping a job, you struggle with getting there. Physical and mental health, severe obesity, diabetes, depression, suicide attempts, STDs, heart disease, cancer, stroke, COPD, and broken bones. So remember I talked about the score? So your scores are correlated with actual diseases. And these are things that you can also just continue to research. ACEs Connection has a lot of this information and these stats. If you guys want to get, this is the source on this. So again, acesconnection.com. So if you have a score of 4 or more, you have an increased chance of getting heart disease. So if you have a score of 4, you're over 1.5 more times likely to get heart disease. If you have a score of 5 or 6, you are twice as likely to get heart disease. If you have a score of 7, 8, you are over 3 times as likely to get heart disease. Chronic depression. Now, I will say that I think these numbers are definitely underreported for men. Men do not report depression very often. They don't go to the doctor enough to get it diagnosed. So I think these numbers are definitely underreported. But for men, if you have a score of 4 or more, you are over 30% more likely to become depressed. And for women, you are nearly 60%. So over 55% more likely to get depression if you have a score of 4 or more as a woman. ACEs score in suicide. So if you have a score of 0, you pretty much, your chances of being suicidal, pretty slim, right? If you have a score of, what is this? Yeah, if you have a score of 10 or more, if you have a score of 4 or more, you are 19 times more likely to become suicidal. 19 times. If you have a score of 3 or more, you're 11 times more likely to become suicidal. Alcoholism. If you have a score of 4 or more, you are 16 times more likely to become an alcoholic. Score of 3, 11 times. Score of 2, 2 times. 10 times more likely. Now, this goes back to my point about susceptibility. Hopefully you guys are able to see where I'm at. I'll make sure I'm not losing you guys. You guys still with me? So yeah, this particular chart actually goes into my point about susceptibility to further trauma. So if you have a score of 4 or more, you are about 32 times more likely to be a sexual assault victim. You know, I'm looking at some of your chat responses. Isaac says some of the questions on his ACEs test are crazy because these are common occurrences to Black children, both within the house and outside, and they're rarely ever treated. Absolutely. Absolutely. And a lot of it's because our parents were traumatized. I look at that, and my mother has at least the same score as I do, if not more. My score was pretty high. The things that white people consider abusive are treated as normal parenting within our community, with the exception of sexual abuse. Right. And we're going to get into more of that actually in a second, because it's more than just, again, like you pointed out in your previous statement, it's more than just what happens in the home. It's also outside of the home as well. So let's get back to the slideshow. I just want to make sure you guys are still with me and I haven't lost y'all. Okay, so this here is the mechanisms by which adverse childhood experiences influence health and well-being throughout the lifespan. So the way this looks, if you look at this goes from conception all the way to death, right? They look at the adverse childhood experience in itself, and then it results in disrupted neurodevelopment. So we'll start at the bottom and work our way up. So you start off with you have your ACEs, you have your adverse childhood experiences. As a result of those experiences, you have disrupted neurodevelopment. And we went over the brain in the previous section of this, right? Which, as a result of the disrupted neurodevelopment, we see issues in their social, emotional, and cognitive parts of their brain. So it becomes impaired. So the social, emotional, and cognitive become impaired. And because of that impairment, they begin to adopt health risk behaviors, such as overeating, such as drugs and alcohol, right? So they begin to adopt these unhealthy behaviors because of this social, emotional, and cognitive impairment as a result of their disrupted neurodevelopment from their adverse childhood experiences. And of course, because of these adopted health risk behaviors, they result in disease, disability, and social problems, and then ultimately early death. So without intervention, if you have a score of 6 or more, it results in early death. So the average person with a score of 6 or more died at 60 versus 79 years of people who did not have an ACE. So I don't know why this looks like that. Oops. But okay, examples of historical and social ACEs. Poverty is an ACE, is an average childhood experience. Now, it's not on this test. There are other tests. There are actually other ACE studies, and we'll get into that. So poverty, homelessness, community violence, racism, homophobia, forced separation, such as deportation, and bullying. So these things are extremely traumatic for children. Now, we're going to go beyond just looking at the ACEs as far as adverse childhood experiences, which you see at the top, such as maternal depression, emotional and sexual abuse, substance abuse, domestic violence, homelessness, incarceration, mental illness, divorce, physical and emotional neglect. Now, those are the things we discussed a minute ago. Now, let's dig a little bit deeper. Let's talk about adverse community environments. Children growing up in poverty are in a constant state of trauma, and they're always stressed out, especially if they're aware of that poverty. So one of the things I remember from my own childhood is not knowing if we were going to have enough food to eat. That was a big, big, heavy trauma for me. If we think about things like poverty as being an ongoing trauma, we can begin to look at reactions to trauma look at behaviors as reactions to trauma versus looking at behaviors as things we have to criminalize. Let's get back to discrimination, definitely traumatic. Anyone here who is, if you're Black, you definitely experienced some discrimination, more than likely, unless you've only been around Black people or something. But I've definitely dealt with discrimination to my face. I know many of us have seen someone who wasn't Black favored over us, maybe in school, or have been followed around this grocery store, or the police question you, but don't question the white person, right? Community disruption. So let's say like a civil unrest, lack of opportunity, economic mobility, and social capital. That is a trauma. The fact that a lot of our parents cannot get out of poverty or get out of the working class or living from check to check, all of that is traumatic for us. Poor housing quality and affordability with this gentrification happening, you're seeing exactly that. And if you've seen what I've seen here, especially in Inglewood, where they jacked people's rents up like double or triple, because at the time they didn't have rent control. You see the pain and anguish on people's faces as they were getting evicted. You could see how traumatic that is. And of course, community violence. Now, what's interesting is there's actually one more extensive than this, but I'm just going to use this one for right now. But they look at the ACEs, even though this organization called RISE, they're a youth organization, they put together a different pyramid. They have a different way of looking at ACEs. So before, if you remember, they were looking at the ACE itself, like the adverse experiences in themselves. This one goes a little bit deeper. It starts off with generational embodiment and historical trauma. So it starts off with the intergenerational trauma part, right? So that's that. And then it goes into race and social conditioning and the local context. This is before you even get to the household part. The fact that you're living in a racist society in itself is a trauma. And that impacts what's happening in your household. The traumas that our parents and grandparents and great-grandparents and great-great-grandparents experienced has had a direct impact on how we operate in our households. So we talk about children being spanked, but that again is not absent of the context in which we've had to survive. So before we even get to the home, before you're even fucking born, the trauma exists. Now, we go from that to the complex trauma and the ACE. Now we get to that part, what's happening in the home, your experiences with your parents, all that stuff. And then we get into the disrupted neurological development, the things that are happening to your brain. And now, instead of addressing it or calling it adoption of health risk behaviors, they have a different term that they use, coping. So the thing about adoption of health risk behaviors, it almost blames the person for having engaged in overeating or having engaged in alcoholism or having engaged in drug use, right? Or any other unhealthy behavior. Not realizing that's literally the thing that's helping them cope with the trauma. Now, that doesn't mean that the thing that's helping them survive is going to help them thrive. Yeah, maybe it's getting them through the pain, but it's also fucking up their opportunities in their lives and maybe fucking up their families, right? But that's because they're coping. Then to go from coping to burden of disease, distress, criminalization, stigmatization, and then we get to early death. I'm going to see if you guys, this made sense to everybody. I want to make sure I'm not losing people. Y'all still with me? Let's see if y'all with me. Ooh, y'all got a lot in here. Okay, I see you. I see y'all. I wish I had more help in here tonight, but it's cool. This is good stuff. Oh, well, I'm glad you like it. Please feel free to you guys to support and donate if this is great information. If you guys want to continue to get some information like this, I will be glad to do more of these. So make sure that you guys donate and support so we can continue to do things like this. It takes a lot of time to put together these curriculums and these resources and things too. So please donate. Let's see. Oh man, I'm glad you're going to be watching this a few times and we're not even done yet. I'm going to give you guys another maybe 30 minutes and then we're going to wrap because I don't want to overwhelm you guys. But I'm glad this is helpful. And I'm hoping more people, so I noticed, we don't have as many people today participating. Hope I didn't bore them, but I definitely wanted to talk about the impact of trauma on us, Let's see. So the questions are making me parse my life like, was that really bad enough to count as abuse? Like that answer should be an easy no. So what's interesting about that point is whether or not you consider something abuse, even on this questionnaire, is almost irrelevant. Because the way that these questions were developed are based off of actual biological, neurological responses in the body. So how do children's bodies react? Regardless of what even I may think is a trauma, like I wouldn't have said my parents' divorce is a trauma because I barely remember their marriage. I remember them fighting, and I remember being glad they stopped fighting. But what I didn't know was that also still had an impact on how I felt at the time. At the time, my dad had to leave the house. Even though I didn't like them fighting, I still loved my dad. And it was still it was still hurtful for him to have gone. So maybe I wouldn't consider it traumatic at the time. I mean, now I do, but at the time I wouldn't have considered it. Maybe even a few years ago, I wouldn't have considered it trauma. But what we're talking about is the actual reactions that your body has, the actual reaction of your brain. So it's not just, what I think, it's really how our bodies are responding. And these are basically developed around the idea of how children's bodies respond, meaning their cortisol levels shoot up or they drop. And if they drop, that means that they're going into a depression. That's not a good thing. And that's because their body has produced so much cortisol that it can no longer absorb it out of its body, and so out of your body, and so your stress hormones just stop producing, and then you can't get up in the morning. You have no energy to do day-to-day stuff. Gotta start prenatal period. What the mother experiences has an impact on the neural development of the baby during pregnancy. Absolutely. Stress in utero has a direct impact on the baby. The mother's happy, baby's happy. You have a much healthier baby if the mom is happy. Cortisol or other stress responses during pregnancy certainly impacts the child's health and even personality development. Absolutely. Absolutely. Let's see. Wow. I didn't know how uncommon the abuse was until I dated a non-Black person. Ashamed of saying it. Yeah, I remember you told us you date white girls, or you did. I didn't forget that shit. I was so used to trauma bonding with Black friends and exes about our abuse. Yeah, and trauma bonds aren't always healthy. Well, I'll say a lot of times they're not healthy. We get into unhealthy relationships through our traumas. And a lot of us end up playing the roles that we played during our trauma, whether it's the perpetrator or the victim. Yeah, it's interesting because you talked about this too. We laugh about it and one-up each other on our stories. That is so common. We do it with poverty. We do it with violence. Yeah, my mama did this to me. And we don't even realize how we've normalized so much trauma. And I had a very similar experience as you, Isaac. You said even the girls talked about it in such a joking way. It wasn't until your non-Black friend, your non-Black ex, stared at you in horror and then started crying at one of your stories. Now, I want to share my own story. This is actually with a Black family, but they were like a middle-class Black family. They were like the Cosbys. Like, honestly, this guy I was dating is my ex. And so I went to have dinner with him. And I remember just sharing my stories growing up, being raised by a single dad, living in South Central, all that kind of stuff, right? While they were from South Central, they're from Leimert Park area, they didn't really live hood life. They lived Black middle class life. So I would tell them stories about my dad dropping me and my brother off at the bus stop and just leaving us there and telling us to figure out how to get to school with some change. We asked him which way to go. He said, ask the bus driver. The people were like, your dad did that as his daughter? Yeah, that's what happened. That's what I just pretty much was on my own a lot. A lot of the stories I would have about things that my dad would say or do, his parents would look at me like, what? Like, almost like, who's this crazy girl you just brought into my house? So yeah, I've definitely experienced that because I didn't realize what I was saying was fucking insane. Like the things that my dad did was not normal. let's see. Yeah, I see you guys are sharing a lot, and I want to get into all of it. Yeah, and the thing is, and I also want to clarify, just because there are certain things that our parents did or didn't do, doesn't mean that they didn't love us. My father was abusive as fuck, but I don't believe he didn't love me. I believe he just didn't know how to love. He was raised by an abusive alcoholic. My grandfather was a wonderful man, but he was an abusive alcoholic. Same thing, so being raised by an abusive alcoholic has a direct impact on you growing up. And so as he's gotten, just because he had kids didn't change that. Like my dad really told my brother my dad said he didn't abuse us. Even though we have story after story of him being physically abusive to us, he said it wasn't abuse. He punched me in the face because he thought I ordered magazines. That's kind of abuse my dad would. When I say abuse, that's what I'm talking about. My dad would punch me in the fucking face. He didn't think that was abuse because his dad would throw glass bottles at his head. So his measurement for abuse was a lot different than most of us today, right? Not because he didn't love me, but because that was his world. He didn't know anything else. Plus later we found out he suffers from some mental health issues. He did at the time, we just didn't know. We weren't even familiar with those mental health issues at the time. Yeah. So I think it's important that, we don't completely just abandon our parents. I'm not saying you have to forgive your parents. I don't think that's a choice. I think it's something that naturally happens. If it's real, it'll just happen. You don't have to consciously say, oh, I forgive my parent. Because the reality is whether either you do or you don't, whether you say it or not. You can say all you want and not actually forgive them. But I will say I often, for my own healing, I extend a lot of empathy because my parents' ACEs scores were just as high as mine, if not higher. And that's just me answering based off the things that I know that they've been through. I don't know all the things my dad has been through. So his score might even be higher. So let's be patient with our parents too. This is definitely not something I want us to walk away from feeling disempowered at all. Yes, I remembered Isaac because you know why? Because when you said it, I was like, dang, that's another good Black brother just out there with them white girls. Milk merchant, as Nina likes to say. I'm teasing. I know you're done with the white girls. Allegedly. Thank you for the compliment on my hair too, Isaac. I appreciate that. Yeah, this stuff is insane. It's crazy to learn about a lot of this stuff. Let's see. I think I have more of my slides I need to get to. Let's see. First, how do I get back to where I was at? I'm gonna master this shit. Y'all gonna trip. When I get there, y'all gonna be like, what? Vida got this down pat. She's smooth on this shit. All right. So there were some other ACEs that were added, and other people have looked at other things that affect children's health. Hard to get by on income, parent guardian divorced or separated, parent or guardian died, parent or guardian served time in jail. They saw or heard violence in the home, witness of or victim of violence in the neighborhood, lived with anyone mentally ill, suicidal, or depressed, lived with anyone with alcohol or drug problem, treated or judged unfairly due to race and ethnicity. So here's the racial disparity. Children with one or more ACE. Now this is old. So these numbers might have changed. Also, the 64% Latino. It's not clear when I got these stats if that was absent, because when I got the stats, it didn't say non-Black Latino. So that could also still include Black people, just to be clear. So children with one or more ACE, 40% white, 51% Black, 64% Latino. Socioeconomic disparity, children with one or more ACE, 62% of those children live in poverty. So there was another study called the Philadelphia Urban ACEs study. Now, this study, unlike the previous study, which was done with people that were 70% white and 70% college educated, this was actually very targeted in a particular neighborhood in Philadelphia. And so they added some extra layers to this because they wanted to look at the trauma that in this predominantly Black neighborhood, an impoverished Black neighborhood, the trauma that they were experiencing. So they added some other questions. In fact, their questionnaire was 40 questions, not 10. They have 40 questions. You can look it up. It's called the Philadelphia Urban ACEs study if you want more information on that. So things that they asked about were things like, did you feel safe in your own neighborhood? People in your neighborhood looked out for each other, stood up for each other, and could be trusted. Bullied by a peer or classmate, saw or heard someone being beaten up, stabbed, or shot in real life, treated badly or unfairly because of race or ethnicity, or if you were ever in foster care. So when they compared the ACEs, the standard ACE score with the urban ACE score, you began, and also the Kaiser study, that's the other one that you see in orange. That was the original study. But in general, the standard ACE score, if you had in this study 30% of the participants had 0 ACEs in the standard ACE score. In the urban ACE score, only 16.8%. But if you go to the 4+ or more, you can see that the urban ACEs, 37% of them have 4 or more. So more people have 4 or more in the urban ACEs study when they added more things to it, such as emotional abuse, physical abuse, sexual abuse. These are the comparisons. You guys want to look at the stats on that. So you'll see that certain things were definitely more prevalent in the Philadelphia study versus the total population. So 33% reported emotional abuse in Philadelphia study, 10% out of the total US population. Sexual abuse, 35% more in Philadelphia, 28% in the US population. It goes on and on. Again, you can look up the urban ACEs study. So that's pretty much, I think that's what I'm gonna get into for the rest of this. Yeah, that's it for today. Because I gave you guys a whole lot today. And I don't want to overwhelm you. But I recommend that you guys go and check out your ACEs score. I think it'll be really helpful for you to learn more about the ACEs study. And just really quickly, I want to get into a couple of things, a couple of notes. So, because I want to explain to you why it has a literal biological effect on you. Why you get more heart disease, in fact, you're more likely to get diabetes and a few other diseases as well. And the reason is because that those chemicals, those stress hormones, such as cortisol, are, again, toxic to your body. So we talk about things being toxic for you. That's what we're talking about, the actual literal toxicity of your hormones, because your body's producing so much that it becomes dangerous. Because you're only supposed to have it in your system for a short amount of time to get you to do the things you need to do. To get up in the morning, go to bed at night, you're in danger, you're supposed to shoot through your system. Problem is when that constant fear response system is being activated over and over and over again, because you have an abusive parent or mentally ill parent, you go to school and being discriminated against, you saw somebody get shot in your neighborhood, you're living in poverty, all these things are stressing you out 24/7. And you begin to behave a certain way. And then what do the adults do? Make you suffer more. Because for whatever reason we have in our culture that if someone is doing something we don't like, instead of helping them, we must make them suffer more. To me, that's a Eurocentric white idea. The whole thing about, making people suffer instead of helping them. I consider that to be a very white thing. But the thing is, those things, so for example, when you're in fear, certain things, your sympathetic nervous system gets triggered. So your pupils dilate, your hair stands on end, you begin to sweat, your mouth becomes dry because it's not time to eat anything. Your body's like, ooh, time to focus on getting safe. Pupils dilate so you can see danger. You're able to see more, you're more alert. Anybody ever been afraid and just took off running? Yeah, that cortisol that made you run hella fast, you didn't even know you could run that fast. That was that cortisol. And glucose. So your liver pumps glucose into your system to make your muscles stronger so you can lift those heavy things. You ever hear those stories about moms who like lift up a car to save their baby? Like, how the hell did they do that? Well, they could do that because all that glucose and cortisol, all that shooting through their system to make them able to do that. The thing about it is, if your body's constantly producing things like glucose, eventually it stops producing glucose because there's so much in your system. And we get diseases like what? Diabetes, right? I mean, we can go on and on, but it's important that we address a lot of our health issues by looking at trauma. What do they keep telling us? You niggas just don't know how to eat. You niggas live in food deserts. All you do is fry food. You niggas just lazy. Nobody tells you that you are predisposed to it, even if you eat healthy. You're still more likely to get these diseases, even if you don't engage in health risk behavior. You should definitely check out that TED Talk with Nadine Burke-Harris. It's on YouTube. I want you guys to check it out because she goes into all this in more detail. And she gives examples of how she uncovered the study, because the study's from the 90s, but she uncovered it in like the 2000s. The other thing I want to add to, so the original ACEs study, by the way, was originally an obesity study. So the obesity study was done by Kaiser. His name was Dr. Vincent Felitti. He was he had a weight loss program, and all these women were a part of this program, were losing weight. Eventually, they start losing the weight, and then they completely drop off the program. So the doctor is like, what the hell happened? If you're doing well, why would you stop going? So then he went to, he wanted to figure out what was going on. So he went to do research, he put together a questionnaire, went to find the women who had stopped being in the program, went to ask them why, and, do some other things, some assessments. So he was asking them things like, so how much did you weigh when you got married? How much did you weigh at your high school graduation? How much did you weigh? And he misspoke. He meant to ask something else. And he ended up asking, how much did you weigh the first time you had sex? The women are answering the question. One particular woman, when it's her turn, she answers the question. He said, well, how much did you weigh the first time you had sex? And she says, 70 pounds. She was a child. So then what he did was he started to realize there was actually a pattern amongst these women in this program. Many of them had already had a sexual or physical abuse history in their childhood. That's the beginning of them discovering the correlation between obesity and trauma. So why were the women leaving the program and gaining their weight back, even though they had been so successful? They never healed from the trauma. One thing I can tell you, as a person who was morbidly obese, which I was, most of you guys know I was 120 pounds heavier than I am now. And I didn't know any of this stuff, by the way. I didn't know anything about trauma and obesity at all. One thing I can tell you is when I lost the weight, one of the things that happens is men give you a lot of attention. And if you're a sexual assault victim, that does not feel good. It does not feel good. It's terrifying. So what happened was these women who had not healed from their trauma are beginning to get more attention from men. And they don't feel safe. It's not a conscious thought. They start eating more to cope and sabotage their weight loss so they can feel safer. Because you feel safer when men aren't approaching you. Again, not conscious. So that's literally the beginning of this study. So after that is when they started to find out there was a correlation between other health risk behavior as well as diseases. How do you address the negative health and mental effects of Black lifestyles in a white society with the need of Black people to stay vigilant to real and perceived threats. What do you mean by mental effects of Black lifestyles? Like, what are Black lifestyles? I'm not clear on what that means. There are a lot of negative side effects to living a stressed and paranoid life as an underclass in America, but it's a big ask for Black people to expect others to operate in good faith. I wouldn't expect, as a Black person, I wouldn't expect anybody to operate in good faith. That's like the least of the things I would expect from anybody. Yeah, I would definitely not expect that shit from really anybody. So I would get that. I wouldn't even have that idea. Because this is the reality. When I share this information with Black people, it's not to me to get outside spaces to understand us. I want us to understand us. I want us to have empathy for ourselves, personally and collectively. That's my entire goal of teaching this stuff. Let's see. I remember hearing that about this study, Vida. They thought they were helping the women with body image by getting them to lose weight and never addressed why they put the weight on. Yeah, you probably heard of this study then. This was the beginning of the ACEs study that we just talked about. So it was a combination of, the bigger study was done by the CDC and Kaiser Permanente, the hospital. So they were the ones that basically did the study. It's still on the CDC website, the Center for Disease Control website. But I definitely want to understand what your other question was, Isaac, because I didn't quite get it. Are there any questions? Because we're pretty much done. I want to make sure I didn't miss any questions. If I missed one, please copy and paste it again in the chat, because I'm trying to do both. This is interesting. Dated without a conscience until late high school because my parents were into the whole, you don't live in the hood, so you don't have any barriers mentality. Yeah, mentality of new Blacks. Yeah. I think because we were fooled into thinking that those are the only barriers that existed. It was just economic. I don't know where we got that from, but there was this belief that if we can fix the economic condition, then our social conditions will be different. I think that's a Booker T. Washington theory. I don't know. Do you have any opinions on how this trauma might relate to the formation of ADOS, the relationship between ADOS and Black immigrants? I don't know. I'd have to see how I'm not gonna say it doesn't relate, but I'd have to see in what ways. I'd have to definitely see in what ways. I do think as ADOS, the goal should be internal healing above all else. As long as we're operating in survival mode, which is what we are currently doing as Black people, as long as we operate in survival mode, we will consistently be chasing our tails. We'll keep coming up because we can't come up with effective strategies if we're constantly in panic mode. Maybe we'll talk about the brain next time. And next time I come on, we'll talk about the brain in that panic mode. And how we operating in survival mode, it inhibits our ability to get to that cortex, that neocortex, to help us be able to be strategic and analytical. So that trauma is what is the reason why we're there, right? So when we talked about trauma before, how it affects your neural development, well, it affects your development as a people as well. It's okay, Outlaw. You did miss most of the strings, so I'm gonna have to go, but it's okay, it's recorded. I'm hoping this was helpful for all of you guys. I really appreciate you. If there are questions, you guys know where to find me. I am on Twitter at Lifestar Media. It's late now. I want you guys to get some rest. I need to get some rest. But again, if you have questions, hit me up at Lifestar Media. You can also find me on Instagram at Vida Star. I have a lot of information on there as well. All right, guys. Thank you so much. Oh, you would ask me a question. Okay. How can Black people both address and change our personal behavior towards one another while living in a society that rewards and promotes that negative behavior? Funny enough, it actually doesn't reward the negative behavior. It criminalizes it. But I definitely get what your question is, and I want to answer it, but we're at the end of the show. Can you do me a favor, Isaac? Please, if there's any way you can copy that question and paste or save it somewhere, I definitely want to get to it because it's such a great question. Just that I have to go now. Thank you, Jordan, for the donation. I appreciate everyone who donated tonight. I wish we had a few more donors, but maybe I bored people today. It's a little more academic than our previous ones. I want you guys, so for your homework, in fact, this is what we'll do. We'll do this once a week, okay? I'll do a training once a week, and you will have homework once a week. How's that? So your homework is to watch the still face experiment video and the TED Talk with Dr. Nadine Burke-Harris talking about ACEs. And then we'll talk about all this stuff next time. So let's do this again next Thursday, okay? Same time, 7 o'clock, 7:15 my time. We'll do the same thing your time. So that's, if you're in the East Coast, that's about 10:15 Thursday. So let's do that. So do your homework, look at that video, and we'll talk about it more. Hope you guys appreciate this, and thank you. You guys have a great night. Oh, my Cash App, I just saw that. My Cash App is message me. Do you have me on Instagram or Twitter? Message me, please, Isaac, so I can give you that. Thank you so much, guys.